The iron around her ankle was rusted, but the chain was new to it, coiled from the base of a cottonwood tree and wrapped around her bare leg, tight as a noose. Flies circled her cracked lips. She didn't blink when the wind kicked dust into her eyes. Maybe she couldn't anymore. Her hair hung in matted ropes, and her arms, burned and blotched, dangled limp at her sides. That was how the mountain man found her. He stood 10 paces away in the orange light of late afternoon, his rifle lowered but not slung, his breath barely audible. A squirrel chattered somewhere overhead. The man didn't move, neither did she. Then, slowly, her lips parted. A sound came out. Not a word, not even a whimper. Just breath, thin and broken, like a flame at the end of its wick. But let's go back to where it all started, they called. Him Holt McCrae didn't talk much, and when he did, it came out hard and sanded down, like wood that's been worked too long by hand. Folks in Jackson Pass whispered he'd once killed a man with nothing but a boot heel, but they whispered that about anyone who lived too far from town. Holt didn't care either way. He came down to trade pelts, buy coffee and bullets, then disappear back into the Rockies with the silence wrapped around him like a second coat. His cabin sat high in the timberline, a crooked structure built from lodgepole pine and mountain solitude. No woman's touch had ever softened it. The closest thing he had to company was a black mule named Bramble and a scatter of trap lines spread across 4 ridge lines. He liked it that way. Clean, simple, honest. But that week, something gnawed at him. It wasn't the snowmelt turning the trails to muck. It wasn't the black bear that had sniffed around his meat cache 3 nights running. It was something else, something that made him glance west every time the wind shifted. A feeling that the land was holding its breath. Then came the boot print, fresh, small, too close to his lined shack, and pointing downhill toward the river trail. The print was shallow, not worn like a man's who knew the land. No tread, no heel. A flat, broken shoe. Maybe a girl's. Maybe barefoot by now. He followed that it was hours before he found her. She was chained just off the old Trapper Road, where wagons hadn't passed in years. A wide bend of sagebrush hid her from the main trail, and Holt might have missed her altogether if Bramble hadn't stopped and refused to go on. The wind carried no smell of blood, but something in the air stung the back of Holt's nose. Fear, maybe, or the kind of hopelessness that doesn't make sound. She was maybe 20, maybe younger. Her face was swollen, sunburned, dirt-streaked, and one side looked like it had been struck hard, more than once. A thin shift covered her frame, but there were no shoes, no bonnet, no bag, no water skin. Just the chain at her ankle, bolted to a pin driven deep into the cottonwood's roots, and silenced no one else was around. No hoofprints, no wagon ruts, no sign of camp. Whoever did this didn't plan on coming back. A Holt shadow crossed her face. Still, she didn't flinch. He squatted, laying his rifle gently in the grass. The chain rattled as she turned her head slightly, not away, but toward him. Her mouth opened again. That breath. Hollow. He reached for the cuff. She recoiled, eyes suddenly wide. The sound of the chain scraping bark slicing through the stillness like a scream. Holt froze. Her lips moved again, fast this time, but no words came out. Just fear. Easy, he muttered, voice raw from disuse. Ain't gonna hurt you. The girl shook her head sharply. Not no, not yes, just panic. Her fingers clawed at the dirt beside her, as if bracing for pain. Holt saw marks on her wrist. Rope burns. Deep. He didn't ask who she was. Didn't ask what happened, didn't need to. He just stood, walked to Bramble's saddlebag, and pulled a small iron wedge from his gear. Walked back. Kneeling again, he slipped it between the chain links. The girl tensed. He raised a rock in his other hand. With a sharp crack, the link popped. She didn't run. She didn't even move. He stepped back and watched her stare at the broken metal like it was a ghost. Then, finally, slowly, she tried to crawl, but her legs buckled. She collapsed sideways into the dry grass. Holt swore under his breath and slung his rifle across his back. Then, without a word, he reached down and picked her up. She was light. Too light. And she didn't fight. The sun was nearly down when Holt reached his cabin. He'd walked the whole way, carrying her in his arms, her body like a bundle of damp cloth against his chest. Her skin was hot, fevered, maybe, and she shivered despite the warm air. She never spoke, just blinked, eyes too dry, Mouth too cracked, he laid her on his cot, fetched a cup of boiled water, and pressed it to her lips. This time, she drank, not much, but enough that he left her there and sat on the porch as dusk fell, rolling a cigarette he wouldn't light. The mountains turned purple. Somewhere below, a coyote barked once. Then again he thought about the rust on the chain, the newness of the pin, and the silence in her eyes that he didn't know what kind of trouble he'd just invited into his life. But Holt McCrae wasn't a man who left folks to rot under a cottonwood tree. Whatever came next, he'd face it when it came. She woke up screaming that it wasn't loud. More like a choke. A cry stifled by a throat gone dry. But it was enough to rattle the cabin windows in Holt's bones. He was already up, crouched by the fire with a pot of beans, when her voice cut through the stillness. He didn't rush. He didn't say a word. He let the quiet settle again. Her breathing slowed. Just a whimper now. Then silenced, he walked over, dipped a rag in water, and handed it to her without meeting her eyes. She took it with shaking fingers, pressing it to her lips. Her eyes, swollen and rimmed red, glanced toward the door like a trapped animal tracking an exit. "You ain't locked in," Holt said gruffly. "Ain't no chains here." She didn't answer, didn't need to. The fear in her shoulders spoke louder than anything she might have said. He left her alone and stepped outside to BY mid-morning. Word had traveled down the mountain that it started with a merchant boy at Dry Creek Station, who'd seen Holt heading home with something in his arms. Said it was a girl, maybe dead, maybe worse. By noon, Daisy Fletcher, the preacher's wife, had whispered it to her sister-in-law, and by dusk, half of Jackson Pass figured Holt McCrae had dragged some poor soul into the timber for God-knew. And one rode up to check. Not yet. But the looks began the next time he came into town. 2 days later, she finally spoke. Holt was mending a snare in the shade, his back to her, when she asked, voice hoarse, "What day is it?" He paused, finger looped in wire. "Tuesday." "What's the date?" "Dunno. Close to the end of May, I reckon." She nodded slowly, then added, "I thought I'd already died." Holt didn't look at her. "You were close." She didn't speak again that day. On the third morning, a knock came at the cabin door, not loud, but not friendly, either. Holt opened it to find Marshall Elkins standing on his step, boots muddy, hat low, hand resting not quite casually on the butt of his Colt. Behind him, 2 townsmen stood shifting on their feet. One was Parsondale, tall and pious. The other was Asa Todd, who owned the livery and didn't believe in wasting spit on poor folk. "Marshall," Holt said. "Neutral." Elkins nodded once. "Just came to see how you're holding up. Word is, you've got company." "She ain't company. She's hurt." "I understand that," the marshal said, though he didn't sound like he meant it. "But a girl turns up half dead, chained by the trail, and next thing she's seen going into your cabin. People get curious." Holt's eyes narrowed. "She speak for herself?" Elkins adjusted his belt. "Not yet. But that's the thing. McCrae, we don't know who she is, or who she belonged to. She ain't property." Asa Todd scoffed behind Elkins. "You sure about that? Girls like that don't end up in chains for nothing." Holt stepped forward once. Just once. Asa flinched. The marshal raised a hand. "Easy now. I'm not accusing anyone. Just doing my job. All we want is to speak with her. Make sure she's not in danger." "She's resting." Elkins nodded slowly, glancing over Holt's shoulder at the dark interior behind him. "Maybe I'll come back tomorrow. Just keep in mind, Holt, this ain't the mountains. Down here, we got laws. And folks are already talking." Holt didn't answer. Didn't need to. He shut the door. Inside, the girl sat on the cot, her back to the wall. She looked smaller in the morning light, not just thin, but shrunken, like her soul hadn't come back all the way. "They'll come again," Holt said simply. She nodded. "You want to tell me your name?" Silence. "You want to tell me what?" "They'll ask." She stared at the crack in the floorboard, then whispered, "They'll ask who did it. Why I was chained there. And if I say it, if I speak it out loud, it'll be real again. It's real either way." Her lips trembled. Holt turned away, voice low. "You don't owe me nothing. But you ain't got to fear the truth in this cabin." She looked at him, really looked, like maybe it was the first time someone had said that and meant it. "My name is Clara," she whispered. "Clara Dawson." That night, she told him a little more. Her father had lost their land outside of Yuma to a railroad broker with no patience for drunks. Her stepmother, bitter and silent, had sold Clara's hand to a freight runner headed north. The man had 2 wives already. Clara was to be the third, but she wouldn't go. So they beat her. When she tried to run, they chained her, just long enough to teach obedience. Then left her there while they rode back into Utah to cool down. She wasn't supposed to die, just break a little. Instead, she was found out a week past. Clara helped stir the fire, washed the linens, mended a torn sleeve of Holt's coat. She didn't talk much, but her eyes softened. The color returned to her cheeks. And once, Holt caught her humming under her breath some old church tune. That made his heart twist in his chest, but trouble was brewing. The next time he came down for coffee and flour, Asa Todd refused to serve him. Best not make this town pick sides, Holt, the man spat. We don't take kindly to women getting stolen off the trail. She wasn't stolen, Holt said. That's not what her kin said. Holt stopped. Her kin. Asa grinned, cold as river ice. Man claims to be her husband's coming down from the Wasatch. Says she's his legal wife. Says you took her. Holt didn't reply, but the blood in his ears began to pound like war drums. Someone was coming. And they weren't coming to ask nicely. The sound came just after midnight. Not loud, just a twig snap in the distance, muffled by pine and shadow. But Holt heard it. He always heard the little things first. He eased the cabin door shut behind him and stepped out into the dark, barefoot in the dew-soaked grass, rifle in hand. The night air smelled of pitch and distance. But underneath it, horses point 3, maybe 4, standing still, watching. They didn't call out. Didn't move, just watched. Holt crouched near the edge of the tree line, eyes adjusting. Moonlight slid across the valley floor, faint and silver. He could see their outlines now, men on horseback, keeping to the shadows, waiting just beyond his perimeter like coyotes sizing up a kill point. One rider dismounted. The others stayed mounted. That was the one in charge. Holt waited. Finally, a voice, low, dry, and rehearsed, called out across the clearing, "She's my wife." Silence. "You're holding a woman who belongs to me." More silence. "I aim to take her back." Still, Holt didn't speak. He stepped further into the clearing, slow, deliberate, the rifle resting at his side but not yet raised. "She said." "No," Holt replied quietly. The voice didn't flinch. "That's not yours to decide." "I didn't decide it." "She did." A soft chuckle from the dark. "McCrae, is it? I heard about you. Mountain man. Trapper. Think you're above the law. 'Cause you live above the snow line. But that girl's mine. She was sold fair. Got papers saying so. You chain your cattle too?" She ran. "She's not livestock." The rider stepped forward, just enough for the moon to light his face, a weathered man with mean eyes and thin lips that looked like they'd never smiled without hurting someone. His hand rested easy on his holster, but the threat in his body wasn't hidden. "Listen to me," the man said. "This can go one of 2 ways. You give her back, she don't suffer more than she already has. You keep her? Well," he gestured to the 2 other riders. "We got time." Holt's jaw clenched. He didn't say another word, just turned and walked back inside. Clara was already standing in the dark. She'd heard it all. Her face was pale, but not afraid. Not like before. Something else was in her now. A fire that had burned low for too long suddenly sparked again. "Is it him?" she asked, voice low. Holt nodded once. She said nothing for a long time. Then, "He won't stop." "I know." She looked down at her hands. They were shaking. "I thought I'd never be more than what they made me," she said softly. "I thought maybe I deserved it. But that night, when you carried me here, I stopped feeling like property." She looked up at him. "You gave me back the part of myself I didn't think was allowed to exist anymore." Holt swallowed. His voice was quiet. "I can't stop him from coming. Not all of them. I know. But I'll stand in their way." She stepped toward him, barely a breath between them now. "If you stand with me, I'll stand too." They didn't touch, but something passed between them, something stronger than blood, thicker than law that promised by dawn. The standoff had begun. The riders hadn't left. They built a small camp at the edge of the clearing, just visible through the trees. Their fires smoked thin and gray, like a signal to the world that time was running out. On the second day, a wagon arrived from town. Marshal Elkins, again this Time with a judge from the county seat, a Mr. Harlan Thorne, who wore a starched collar and a face that looked carved from chalk. "We're here to sort this peaceful," the marshal said, standing outside Holt's door. "Nobody wants blood." Holt stepped out. Clara stood just behind him. Thorne's voice was smooth, oily. "Young lady, a man named Silas Dorn claims you're his lawful bride. Says you signed papers in Yuma." Clara stepped forward. Her voice did not shake. "I never signed anything willingly. My stepmother forged the paper, and I was dragged into a wagon while I screamed. Does that count for law?" The judge hesitated. "It's not the usual way, I admit." But what?" Clara said. "I was chained to a tree." Elkins cleared his throat. "If what she's saying is true, Judge, that's not a marriage. That's kidnapping." The judge frowned. "And yet, no witnesses. No writ. No one to verify." Clara stepped past Holt now. Her eyes locked on the judge. "You ever been held down, sir? You ever had your legs give out under you from hunger, but they said you were being difficult? You ever begged a man not to touch you and heard him say, 'You're mine now'?" Silence. "You ever been chained up like a dog and left for the coyotes?" "No." She took a slow breath. "Then maybe don't talk to me about proof. I am the proof." The judge said nothing. And for the first time in Holt's memory, neither did the marshal. That night, Clara sat beside the fire with her knees tucked under her. Holt handed her a tin cup. "You didn't have to speak," he said. She shook her head. "Yes, I did." The wind moved softly through the trees. Somewhere down the slope, the horses shifted, restless. "They're not gonna leave quiet," Holt muttered. "I don't care anymore," Clara said. He looked at her. "I'd rather die free in these woods than live one more day owned." She leaned against the log wall and stared into the firelight, then added softly, "But I'd rather live." Holt's hand tightened around the cup. He didn't say it out loud, but he agreed with everything in her voice. They came at dusk, not with guns drawn or torches lit, but in silence, the kind that meant decisions had been made. 3 riders, same as before. Dorn in the lead. His hat sat low, his eyes unreadable. The 2 men flanking him were younger, leaner, but carrying the same deadness in their faces. Men who'd done violence before and would do it again, if paid or told to. Clara was inside, seated at the table with Holt's old Spencer rifle resting across her knees. Her hands weren't trembling. Not this time. Outside, Holt waited. The fire crackled between him and the riders, spitting embers like nervous breath. The clearing was quiet enough to hear the crickets. "Last chance," Dorn said, voice calm but full of rot. "Ain't looking for a fight, McCrae. Just want what's mine." "She ain't yours." She signed. "She was sold." Dorn glanced past Holt, toward the faint glow in the cabin window. "You got no right to keep her." "I didn't keep her. She stayed." Dorn's jaw worked, something ugly flickering beneath his face. "This ain't gonna end well. You know that, right?" Holt's voice stayed low. "I reckon it won't." For a few seconds, no one moved. Then Dorn's hand went to his belt. He didn't even clear leather, just touch the grip. That was enough that Holt's rifle was already rising. But the sound that cracked through the dusk didn't come from him. It came from the cabin, a .1 clean shot. Dorn's hat flew off. The bullet hadn't hit him, not quite. Just a warning, close enough to part hair and pride. The 2 riders jerked their reins, startled, hands halfway to iron. "Next one goes through his mouth." Clara's voice rang out, clear as water. "I don't miss twice." The riders hesitated, looking to Dorn. His face had gone pale, but not out of fear, out of rage. "She's bluffing," he growled. Inside, another round clicked into place. "Try me," she said. Dorn's lips curled. Then he spat into the dirt and turned his horse without another word. His men followed. N.O. shots fired, N.O. threats screamed. Just retreat, quiet and shameful, into the trees. When Holt stepped back inside, Clara was still seated. The rifle rested in her lap, barrel cooling. He looked at her. She didn't smile, just breathed. "I thought I'd be afraid," she said softly. "But I wasn't." Holt nodded. "You shouldn't be." They didn't speak again for a long while. Just let the night return to what it was. Dark, alive, and no longer full of threat. 2 days passed. N.O. riders came. N.O. word from town. Clara helped patch the roof, where winter had chewed through the pitch. She strung rabbit with steady fingers, humming under her breath again. The color in her skin had returned, the set of her shoulders lighter, but strong. They didn't talk about what came next, some things you didn't speak of until they were ready. The knock came quietly, late morning. One sharp rap. Clara opened the door. Marshal Elkins stood there, hat in hand, boots dusted from the long ride. Behind him stood a woman, stout, weather-worn, with a scar over one cheekbone and a gray braid down her back. Her face was lined with age, but her eyes were sharp. "This here's Evelyn Greeley," the marshal said. The woman nodded. "Run the mission house east of Donner Pass. We taking girls like you. Women, too. No questions. Just clean sheets and time." Clara's breath caught in her throat. Evelyn looked her over once and added, "I ain't here to take you. Only here to say, if you want a place, it's yours." Clara looked at Holt. He said nothing. Just stepped aside, letting the breeze pass between them. She turned back to Evelyn. "Thank you," Clara said. "But I already found my place." That evening, Holt and Clara sat on the porch. The air was warm. The sky ran gold and lavender across the ridgeline. She leaned her head against the cabin wall and whispered, "I thought I'd never get to choose anything." Holt didn't look at her. "What changed?" "You." He let the silence sit for a moment, then spoke. "You saved yourself, Clara." She smiled gently. "No, I just remembered I could." The mountains went quiet as the sun dipped. Somewhere far below, a single bird called out. And for the first time in a long while, it didn't sound like a warning. It sounded like freedom. Years passed. The world didn't stop for them. It never does. Railroads came, cutting lines through mountains Holt once hunted in. Telegraph poles rose like bones across the plains. Towns swelled, and Jackson Pass grew loud with politics, steam, and wagons too clean for the dust they rolled through. But up in the timberline, the cabin stood, logs darkened by time, smoke curling steady from the chimney. A new vegetable patch, carved into the earth by smaller, gentler hands. Flowers where once there was only stone. Clara stood barefoot in the doorway, hands streaked with flour. The cabin smelled like bread and meat stew. A quiet Sunday. Inside, Holt carved a new handle for the old Spencer rifle. He worked slowly now, not because his hands had grown clumsy, but because he didn't have to rush anymore. Outside, a boy of about 6 chased a chicken into the yard, laughter bouncing against the hills. A girl, maybe 4, sat beside the fire pit drawing in the dirt with a stick. Their faces had Clara's spirit and Holt's steadiness. Neither child had ever known chains. Once a year, Clara went to town alone. She rode a painted mare with sure hooves and carried no fear in her back. Folks in Jackson Pass stood when she walked in. Not out of duty, out of quiet respect. They didn't ask where she came from anymore. They asked her opinion on teachers, grain prices, and weather. They called her Mrs. McCrae, though she never took his name on paper. The paper never mattered. On one such trip, she stopped by the mission house. It had moved from Donner Pass to the edge of Jackson Creek, where young girls from the mining slums came to learn to read and rest without being touched. Evelyn Greeley had gone mostly blind, but her voice still filled the chapel on Sundays, steady and sharp. Clara helped there now. She never told the girls everything, just enough to let them know the dark doesn't last forever. Some nights, Holt would wake to find Clara sitting on the porch in her shawl, looking out over the valley. He wouldn't ask what dream pulled her from sleep. He'd just bring 2 cups of coffee, still warm, and sit beside her. Sometimes they talked about the weather, or the mule's limp, or whether the boy should learn trapping or books first. Sometimes they didn't. Once, after a long silence, Clara asked, "Do you think it would have changed me if you hadn't found me?" Holt thought about it. The way she looked, broken under that cottonwood tree. The silence in her that almost swallowed her whole. "I think you would have found your own way," he said. She shook her head. "No, I think I'd be dead." Holt didn't argue that he didn't like to. But later that night, after the fire burned down and she was asleep, he stood outside under the stars, hat in hand, and said softly to the dark, "Thank you for putting me on that trail." By the time their children were grown, the mountain had changed again. The river ran deeper. The storms came harder. But the cabin stood. Holt's beard had turned white. Clara's hair, too. But her voice still rang clear, and her back never bent. Point one. Spring morning, a rider came up the trail. A stranger. He was clean-cut, nervous, and holding a notebook. "Are you the McCraes?" he asked, tipping his hat. Holt stood on the porch. Clara wiped her hands on her apron. Yes, she said. The man hesitated. I'm with the Federal Land Office. We're documenting homesteads that predate the county lines. Names, stories, claims, that sort of thing. Holt shrugged. Ain't much to tell. But Clara stepped forward. She didn't tell the full story, just enough about a girl who was left for dead. A man who didn't speak much, but did what was right. A cabin, a garden, 2 children. A life rebuilt in silence and sunlight. The man wrote it all down. Before he left, he looked back once and said, I think people ought to know this place matters. Clara smiled. It matters because we said it did. He nodded. May I ask, was it love? From the start. She looked at Holt. He met her eyes. No, she said gently. It was mercy. Then, after a breath, she added, and from there, love found us. Years later, long after the roof was replaced again, long after the mule died and the children rode off to make lives of their own, the cabin sat quiet in the early morning light. Inside, an old rifle rested above the hearth at a dried chain link. Hung beside it, not as a trophy, but as a memory, and on the porch, carved into the wood by someone's careful hand, were 6 simple words. She was never chained again.